In the summer of 1944, Allied forces pushed north through Italy, driving German troops from towns and cities that had been under occupation for nearly a year. This footage shows American soldiers entering the Tuscan towns of Cecina and Siena during the Italian campaign of the Second World War. The town of Cecina lay near the western coast of Tuscany, along routes vital to military movement and supply. German forces had occupied the town after Italy's surrender in 1943, using it as part of their defensive network. As Allied forces advanced in the summer of 1944, German units withdrew northward, avoiding encirclement while attempting to slow the Allied advance. Air attacks and artillery fire damaged infrastructure throughout the region, though many civilian structures remained standing. When American troops entered Cecina, they encountered a population that had endured months of war. Civilian life had been shaped by shortages of food, limited transportation, and the constant uncertainty of military occupation. The arrival of Allied soldiers signaled a shift in control. Military vehicles moved through streets that had previously been under German authority. For Allied forces, securing towns like Cecina ensured safe routes for continued movement and supply. The city of Siena held both historic and strategic importance. Located inland, it stood at a crossroads connecting multiple routes through central Italy. Control of Siena allowed Allied forces to move more freely across the region. Unlike many cities that became battlefields, Siena was declared an open city. This designation was intended to prevent its destruction and preserve its historic structures. German forces withdrew from the city in July 1944 as Allied troops approached. When American forces entered Siena, they did so without major combat inside the city itself. The transfer of control reflected the broader German strategy of withdrawal to stronger defensive positions farther north. The capture of Rome on June 4, 1944, marked a turning point in the campaign. It was the first Axis capital to fall to Allied forces. However, the war in Italy was far from over. German forces withdrew northward in an organized retreat, establishing new defensive positions and continuing to resist. As they moved, they destroyed bridges, mined roads, and used the landscape to delay the Allied pursuit. Behind them lay towns and cities that had lived under occupation. For the civilians of central Italy, the approaching Allied forces represented the end of German control and the beginning of liberation. The Allied invasion of mainland Italy began in September 1943. Following the surrender of the Italian government, German forces quickly occupied much of the country, determined to resist the Allied advance. The campaign that followed became a slow and difficult struggle. Mountain terrain, narrow roads, and determined German defenses delayed Allied progress for months. Each river valley and hilltop became part of a defensive system designed to slow the Allied armies moving north. American forces, particularly units of the United States Army, played a central role in this advance. Their objective was to break through German defensive lines, liberate occupied cities, and force German forces to retreat toward northern Italy. The Allied advance continued inland through the region of Tuscany. This landscape of hills, valleys, and historic cities presented both opportunities and challenges. Elevated terrain provided defensive advantages, and German forces used these positions to slow Allied progress. The German army conducted a disciplined withdrawal. Rather than remaining in vulnerable positions, they pulled back to stronger defensive lines farther north. Their objective was to delay the Allies as long as possible. Meanwhile, Allied forces focused on maintaining momentum. Engineers repaired damaged roads and bridges, while infantry and armored units continued their advance. The liberation of each town weakened German control and brought Allied forces closer to their next objective. Liberation brought relief, but also uncertainty. Years of war had disrupted normal life. Infrastructure needed repair, supplies were limited, and the future remained unclear. Military occupation by Allied forces restored order and established new authority. Food distribution, medical care, and administration followed the advancing front. Though Cecina and Siena had been liberated, the war in Italy continued. German forces regrouped along defensive positions known as the Gothic Line, where fighting would continue into 1945. The events shown here represent one moment in a longer campaign. The advance through Italy would ultimately contribute to the defeat of German forces in Europe. These images remain a historical record of liberation, military movement, and the gradual restoration of civilian life in wartime Italy.